Welcome. I'm Kelly Kearney with Star Constellation Magazine, and music fans, we have a big treat for you today. Taking time out of his busy touring schedule, because he's on tour right now, to talk about his new LP, Heart of the Eternal. Welcome, AJ Croce.
Hey,
So
thanks
nice
for
to meet you.
having me.
Absolutely. It's so nice to meet you. I was a big fan of your father, and then when I heard you, maybe about 20 years ago, I found your music, and I really enjoyed it. Such a different vibe, and we'll get to that. Let's talk a little bit about artists who influenced you growing up. I, read a little bit about your background and jazz and blues and BB King when you were 18. What were some of the artists you grew up listening to that kind of influenced your sound and what you are today?
All kinds of stuff from Ray Charles was my gateway drug, but Johnny Johnson, who played with Chuck Berry, Fats Waller, the Stride guys like that, blues guys like Memphis Slim. There were some guys that were guitar players that taught me how to play, like listening to Mississippi John Hurt or Blind Blake. It simplified the left hand stride for me, so I learned how to do that stuff through them. And there was the boogie guys like Meade Lux Lewis, Albert Ammons, Pete Johnson. I could talk piano players and influences all day long. I think it gets to the 50s and the New Orleans artists that were coming out, and Alan Toussaint was always a big influence, and Stevie, and
The Neville Brothers.
getting into the 60s, like guys like Ian McLagan, who took it in a totally different way on piano. And then that's just my piano influences, not my musical influences or songwriting or guitar or whatever, but like that's the root of it.
You know,
Rose Allison, yeah.
you started on the piano, twinkle those ivory keys, but you are also one heck of a guitar player. Obviously, now we can see that in your work. Early on, did the guitar feel a little bit too Croce coded, maybe, and so you kind of avoided it a little bit?
I don't think so, because I started piano so young. What happened is I'm left-handed, so uh,
Okay.
I play piano left-handed. But when I tried to play guitar left-handed, the person that was showing me was having trouble showing me. I don't know why. It's just a mirror image. But so I didn't pick up the guitar, and then in my early 30s, I got one as a gift, and it was right-handed, so I just learned how to play right-handed guitar.
Oh.
And every once in a while I dream about playing it left-handed, but it's all right-handed. So
That's so funny. It
yeah.
is a mirror image, though, so it's interesting that they struggle with that. But I myself, when I played guitar, I had a left-handed teacher, and they also struggled a little bit. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Your new LP, we have to talk about that. Part of the Eternal comes out on March 7th. What should fans expect from this album? What are they looking
this
forward to?
I think this album is really special. And I'm not just saying it because I did it. In fact, that would be the last thing I would do. But I think it really is a unique project, diverse, and yet I don't feel like it's without a focus of what it's about. It's a project that I was so comfortable in making, in the sense that there are a lot of times when you go in, you have the material you're going to do, but you're not really necessarily comfortable with the band, or you feel rushed.
Right.
You don't know the producer, and in this case, working with Shooter Jennings was great. He's a friend, and then I went in with my touring band, who are pretty iconic studio musicians as well. So I was we'd been doing these Croce Plays Croce shows for 2 years at that point when we went in, and the band was so tight. It was just in between stuff, and we had been playing these new songs, maybe one a night in different cities, just trying things out, seeing what worked, seeing what connected. And as we went, it just really felt good. It was just a fun record to make.
Well, the first single that was released, "Complications of Love," it was just recently released. It has like this kind of Spanish bolero meets tango,
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of jazzy bluesy thing. I felt like you'd hear it in kind of like, just the streets of Spain in some ways. It kind of got me dancing, feeling like I wanted to dance a little bit. What was the inspiration behind that song?
Well, it started off as an instrumental piece, and I wrote it on guitar, and it was just, it was an instrumental piece. It was a way to practice those diminished runs that you hear like in Django Reinhardt songs, and in that gypsy jazz style of the 30s and early 40s. And But then it also has a bit of a tango feel,
Ooh,
and then
romantic.
yeah, yeah, very, it's a romantic song. And I think you the solo section is really a riff on a Chopin etude, which I
Mm.
played on piano, and so I just broke it down and played it in unison with the violin on the record, and create it. It was just a fun thing,
It's so lush. It's so like just makes you feel. It kind of transported me for a second when I was listening to it. I can totally tell that it started off as a instrumental piece because it was heavy in the instrumental. It was a
Yeah.
beautiful piece, I thought.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. We have to talk about your creative process because every musician has a different one.
Yeah.
Are you sort of a music first, lyric second kind of writer, or does it start with like a word or story and everything organically grows off
Oh,
of that?
in Traditionally, like, I've written in every fashion. It can be an expression that I write down. All of a sudden, I write a verse down, or it's like the hook. It's definitely the chorus. Sometimes it is the music first. And this project, I think I wrote more of the music first, lived with it for a minute, kind of had a sense of what the story was, based on what the music was, and drew from that. And I felt like it was really, it was an interesting way of doing it that was a little different than I had in the past. I mean, for so many of the songs to be written as a composition, musical composition, instrumental first, there were a few exceptions on the record. You know, there's a song on this album called "Turned Around," which is just all oxymorons, and I was trying to make sense of nonsense. It was an exercise initially, just like a lyric exercise, a writing exercise, and I like to do those. Figure out something that give myself a challenge. Another thing I did was try and write a very personal song without any personal pronouns, like
So,
little things to just it's like a puzzle.
yeah, it
Uh,
takes you out of your box a little bit, makes you
yeah,
think from a different part of your brain.
absolutely. And then sometimes, working with a different scale than I've worked with before,
Mhm.
will inspire a completely different approach to something. Working in a different time signature might give me an inspiration. Working in different keys is always a good way to see a new direction that could come from it. Just because on piano and guitar everything is so completely different.
Right, right, absolutely. You had a short. You mentioned the tour, Croce by Croce. You had a short break after that tour, and now you're already back on the road with this new album. What's been the fan response so far to the new work? Because I'm sure they're hot off the heels of the Croce by Croce, and now this is a whole new piece. How have there been reactions been to that?
The new songs are getting over so well. I'm actually surprised. You never know how new songs are going to be received. And I had 10 albums before this one that people bought, so I don't know what they were. People come for different reasons. There were certainly people coming to hear more Croce stuff, and we'll play it in the show. We play some of that, but whereas the Croce Plays Croce was 70% my dad's stuff and 30% mine, or songs that were like covers that were connections between us. This is on its head. This is 70% mine and 30% his. There's mixes of different inspirations, a few covers that were on different albums of mine, and that have just become part of the show that people request. So it's been a really pretty enjoyable period of time, and starting to introduce this new material. And of course, having social media and having the ability to share it with hundreds of thousands of fans already that are tuned in really does help. So they know that when they come, they're going to hear this song, or they're going to hear that song, or maybe they only heard me playing it at home or something like that.
Right.
They get to see it with the full band, and see how it works.
Well, you were mentioning, you've got 10 albums before, 30 years in the business. One album that stuck out to me. I always thought the album "I Got a Name" was sort of like this tongue-in-cheek reference to what was likely a lifetime of kind of stepping out of your father Jim Croce's shadow. It's kind of an enormous shadow, and asking audiences to consider you in the context of your own individuality as an artist, rather than some bad Leroy Brown Jr. or something. And now,
Well,
after like
yeah.
3 decades, the business of avoiding it, you're now embracing it. You did this tour; it was hugely successful. You're sharing his music with your own music. You're putting your own spin on his work, making it your own. What inspired that embracing of his music after you sort of, wanted to establish yourself as your own artist?
I think there was, having my own identity was really important. It's being a relative of someone who's well known. It can pose a lot of challenges as far as having an identity. It's very hard for anyone outside of myself to see me without thinking of him, let alone saying something. So having a personal identity is incredibly challenging if you're related to someone who's well known. That's all most people can think about. So the psychology of it is kind of crazy, but it's the way life is. Now, I think initially I was, as you mentioned, I was on the road with BB King at 18. I was out with Ray Charles, Aretha, James Brown, Willie Nelson. I was on tours with Santana and Rod Stewart and Jeff Beck together, and all of those things gave me confidence. None of those people needed me to sell tickets. None of them needed my family name. They had me because they dug what I did, and they wanted to be a part of it and sit in with the band, and it became part of my story. All of that diversity is what has become my calling card. That the different styles, eras, and genres of music that I draw from have become the sort of aspect of who I am as an artist. Now, in answering your question, I was really happy working behind the scenes with my father's catalog as a publisher, making sure that it was heard by a new generation, making sure that I protected it, as well as making sure that it was available for anything from the right film project to TV series like Stranger Things that really made an impact in sharing it to a new generation. And I think there was a point in time where I had enough success, chart success of my own, and I just felt like I would like to, dive in, just see. By the time I played one of his songs in one of my shows, I'd been playing for 25 years, touring for 25 years. No one expected it anymore. And I think the fact that no one came for that made it liberating.
Yeah.
Also, I think if that show would have been just a night of his music, I never would have done it. And had it just been a night of his music and my music, I never would have done it. It was all about the storytelling. And the thing that most people don't know, because not very few people saw him live, he only had a career of 18 months. So, people never heard the stories. They didn't know that, like, he would play a 2-hour show and maybe only play 5 songs because he was telling so many stories. That was a huge part of who he was, and it was a huge part of that show. And I think
growing up, my best friend was a big fan of his, and that was one of the things he actually taught me when I was a teenager, that he was a great storyteller. That your
yeah,
father was, yeah. So that's interesting, and you're a good storyteller on stage.
well, it's a definitely an art, and it's something that I've worked hard at getting good at, and communicating to the audience is always, I think, really important. It sets the stage to be able to take them on a musical, safari through who knows what we're doing, And
Yeah.
I've always loved having a very loose set list, in the sense I have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just like I have places where I know there's going to be stories, I know there's going to be moments where I'm connecting with the audience. I feel like that's really, really important. And in the same way, I feel like that new record is kind of doing that same thing musically. As far as the tempos of one song to the next, as far as the stories from one to another, and going in and arranging the songs accordingly. I think it all kind of fits what I who I am and what I do.
Like the culmination of your career, sort of. It sounds a little bit like. Did the tour, did the Croce by Croce tour, the experience, bring you closer, not just to your dad's music, because it's just been a constant in your life, but to the man he was when he wrote those legendary songs? Because I'd imagine it was a different perspective tackling this tour, artist to artist, adult to adult, than it was to father to son.
I am so much older than my father, and I had so much more experience performing. And as a piano player, as a musician, I had grown, in all different directions. He never had the time to do that.
Right, right.
And he was wonderful at what he did, and I don't want to diminish that at all. But in the process of performing Croce Plays Croce, what I feel I noticed as far as a deeper connection was different than anyone might think. The connection that I felt, the times that I felt most connected, was when I took a song and deviated from the record.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a deviation as far as like, I'm gonna make this this ballad a heavy metal song or something.
Right.
We're gonna treat this like that. It was about taking the song, really recognizing musically where it came from, knowing the roots of where it came from, and then taking that story and that storyline and doing that. Look, my father's influences, you could hear. You Don't Mess Around with Jim, you can hear Jimmy Reed, Bright Lights, Big City, and Big Boss Man, and all of that R&B that he grew up listening to. You can hear Lieber and Stoller in those songwriting, that the character songs, whether it's that or Leroy Brown or Roller Derby Queen or Rapid Roy or Speedball Tucker. All these characters, they were similar in the sense, like Lieber and Stoller would write these songs for the Coasters and for the Drifters and for Elvis and for Big Mama Thornton and all these different artists, and they were these character songs, right? But my father found a way to turn them inward and make the characters somehow a little more universal. Like you not only did you know who they were, but you might have been a little bit of that character, or you knew that person, or it was a friend of yours. That's who that was, or and I think that relatable aspect of what he did was really fun to the listener. But for me as a player, it was also fun to take those influences and go, wow, well, what if we do treat it a bit more like a Jimmy Reed song? Or what if we do take it over to something else that was happening? Like, my father loved Lee Dorsey, and he loved Alan Toussaint songs and covered them when he was, coming up. And so I was, had the great privilege to work with Alan and to be able to record with him and perform live with him. And so I felt like there was a lot of, kind of completing the circle with with that show in the sense that I was able to work with a lot of these people that he never really had a chance to meet or work with or get to know, but who were incredibly into what he did, you know, and so it was an interesting process. I think there was a period about 25 years ago when I was archiving a bunch of his music and found this tape of these really obscure songs, Fats Waller, Bessie Smith, Pink Anderson, and not like the famous songs by these people, but the really deep cuts. And they were the exact songs I'd covered since I was 13. And so when I heard that 25 years ago, and I mean 12 songs, no one plays these songs. I never heard my dad play them, but I had also found these same songs by these same artists, and I went, we have a connection that's deeper, not just the record collection, but a connection that is far deeper. And I felt like that was a starting point, for that show, But before I did any of those shows, before I ever touched one of his songs, it was about finding my own voice as a kid. I've been touring since I was 16 years old. So it's always been about learning and finding new ways to share an idea and communicate.
Yeah, I think putting your own spin on that work and finding the roots of his work and the similarities between your own roots is a really profound answer. And I was kind of touched by that answer, actually. I think that any fan of his and any fan of yours could see those connections while being completely different artists, But there is a running line through that. And that's a fascinating answer. What from this album and this tour that you're doing now, what's some of the your favorite songs to perform live, or maybe the ones that stand out that the audiences are really getting into?
There's a bunch that are really connecting. The ones that I see really connecting are I Got a Feeling, Hey Margarita, Turned Around, The Finest Line. I mean, honestly, there's a bunch of stuff, so much fun. People are digging. I won't play them all in one evening. I'm not playing the whole album, but night to night, I'm what I didn't play last night, I'll play tonight, and of course I'll play the single, and and that's how it goes. But it's really interesting to see. Fortunately, I'm traveling with the same band I recorded with, so when we play it live, it sounds like the record. So when people come, they hear the singers, they hear the band, and it's an iconic band. Everyone in this band won a Grammy for their musicianship on wonderful music. They're such a talented group of people.
Is each night on stage a little bit spontaneous about what songs you're going to do? Like you mentioned, you have a beginning and an end, sort of the stories you want to kind of touch on in the middle. But is it sort of spur of the moment? Hey, the crowd is feeling this, I'm feeling this, let's go here. Really spontaneous like that when you're on stage?
Always. Yeah. The set list is really a song list. I have about 50 songs on there, and then I take requests too. I'll open the request line, and people shout out what they came to hear, and we'll do some of that, and so it's a fun process. I think what's interesting is that we were able to grow. I never expected to find fans through my father's fans. That was an unexpected thing completely for me. I really genuinely just thought, well, they're going to appreciate the story, they're going to appreciate the music. I feel confident that we did a great job of performing it, but I didn't know that what they would get from that show was that they became real fans of mine. They came as fans of my father's and became fans of mine. And so I'm for the first time able to play these wonderful venues that before doing the Croce shows, I wasn't able to play places this big, and I
Right,
think
right.
it was because of playing that music and because of turning an audience on to the all of the 30 years before I started that tour of my music that they I was prepared for it. I was ready for it. I didn't, it wasn't like some overnight success. I've been touring for 35 years. So
Right.
I was completely ready and prepared to do the job. And I take it seriously.
You share a talent with your father, love of music, DNA. But when it comes to performing, you definitely bring your own unique vibe, like we mentioned. You were born into folk, but you leaned into blues. Was there a moment in your life that uh, touched you in a way that had you dive into blues, like that was the thing that really attracted you to that genre, and that became your. Because at 18, playing with BB King, I mean, must have had many years
Well,
prior to that really being just knee deep in that blues. What was that?
there was a lot of stuff. First of all, my father's record collection was hardly folk.
Huh?
Uh, and that was what I listened to. I mean, it was old blues, old
Yeah.
jazz, old rock and roll. There was folk in it. Don't get me wrong. There was great folk music, but um, and there was world music, and there was opera, and there was it was all over the map. And so that's what I grew up with. And then
Mhm.
at 4, I lost my sight. I lost my sight and I got turned on to Ray Charles and I got turned on to Stevie Wonder and I got turned on to all the old blind blues guitar players, Blind Blake, blind Willie McTell, Blind Lemon Jefferson, all of these guys who uh, were kind of inspirations, and I learned to play the music. I learned because it touched me,
Yeah.
and so I gradually got some of my vision back when I was by the time I was 10. um, but by that point, I already knew what I wanted to do. At 12, I played my first gig for money, and then at 15, I really got started doing what I do. But I'm a fifth generation musician. It's not just my dad. It's not just my dad and my mother. It's my
Yeah, your mom.
parents and great grandparents all played music. My grandmother had a television show in Philadelphia in the 40s. I wish I had any piece of it.
Any
But
copy of
back
it?
then they just taped over the show they just had just done. So I don't have any of it. But she was a piano player, entertainer. It's a calling and it's definitely in my blood. But to have the I guess have the sort of patience to practice and practice and practice is, I think, the thing that is in the DNA. It's not that some musical brilliance. It's the inclination to work hard, and it's the inclination to do your best. And I think in that way, um, we all have that, in common. Anyone that does this for a living, and it's an unpredictable life. When I was 17, I played for a woman named Mae Axton. She heard me play. She wrote Heartbreak Hotel for Elvis.
Oh,
And she was also Hoyt Axton's mother, but she had written all kinds of big songs that and she heard me and she said, "You got it." She called up Cowboy Jack Clement and said, "You got to hire this kid." Cowboy was the staff producer for Sun Records from 53 to 60. Then he moved.
right, for Elvis and
He worked with Elvis, Jerry Lee, Roy Orbison, most notably Johnny Cash
yeah, Johnny Cash. Yeah.
for more than 50 years. They worked together, and so my first gig was filling in for Jerry Lee Lewis. He walked out of the studio, I walked in, and I had no idea. But I'm sitting there with Elvis's band,
Amazing.
and it's at that moment, I realized that what I was drawn to and what I loved doing, whether it was in that way, kind of country rockabilly kind of stuff, and early rock and roll, um, or whether it was blues or jazz or whatever the influences. I mean, there's plenty of pop influences in what I do. It's just
Sure.
not be contemporary pop. And
Yeah.
um, and I think it was at that moment I realized I wasn't going to fit in as a contemporary artist. I did not care about fame. I cared about quality. I cared about being proud of what I was doing. I really cared about, um, if no one ever hears me, and then they go back in 100 years and listen to what I did, hopefully it resonates. Hopefully it's not so much of one time that it has an element of timelessness. That's the goal all the time. And it's ambitious. I know it's ambitious, but that's the goal.
I think it's a goal that you tackle well. Like even this in this album, you can hear deep historical roots, but not just American music roots. You
Mm-hmm.
know, music from all over the world roots, and kind of putting your own spin on that. I don't want to say spin because that's not really it, but sort of embracing those roots and turning it into something that's your own. You can hear those influences in your work, and it's very different than what someone says, "Oh, I love Jim Croce. I'm going to check out his son." You're not going to get that same music. You open your mind because you're going to get a whole world of something different. And I think you're doing that so well, so successfully. In the 30 years you've been making music, you've worked alongside, like you're mentioning, these amazing, amazing artists, Willie Nelson, the Neville Brothers, Leon Russell, Jack Clement, and your career has all these dream collaborations. Like any other artist, if I was to say, what's your dream collaboration? They would list everyone you worked with when you were 18,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, so it's like you're an adult, you've worked with so many people. Is there anyone left that you have a
Of
dream
course,
collaboration left?
there's so many people left. I mean, more people than ever left. I don't know. I don't know. I think there's one of the reasons I live in Nashville is because it's such a collaborative community. I'm not there for the weather, certainly. I just think that I moved there because of the collaborative nature of the artistic community, and I've been working there. Like I said, I flew there at 17 to work with Cowboy, but I've been back every year as a writer, and moved finally moved there in the early 2000s. But it was it was really that kind of the sense of, I think most people think of it as country music, and
Yeah.
that's unfortunate, but that's fine. The reality is that it's always been a place for diversity, believe it or not. And whether it was in I mean, people don't think of Stravinsky being in Nashville, but he was.
Yeah.
People don't think of all of the artists that are, there was my first time in Nashville when I was 17 and doing those sessions. I mean, I met this contingent of British expats. They were songwriters and publishers, and then the psychedelic era hit in England, and there was no more work for them. They weren't, people weren't. They were, everyone was writing their own stuff at that point. There were a few covers. They moved to Nashville, where people still recorded other people's songs, and songwriter had a role in the community, and there was just a huge community of old rock musicians, and just really diverse group of people, from gospel to hip hop to R&B and blues and jazz, and you just wouldn't expect it. But that's the secret of the town.
Yeah.
That's what I always saw there. It's what I kind of was drawn to, and you're able to really have that connection. And now that most of the businesses there. It just makes it easier,
Mm-hmm.
to be there because my label's there, my publisher is there or has an office there, and even if the people that sign me are out of LA or out of New York, everything, the whole business is now in Nashville, so it's become the center of the music business.
Yeah, it's a music town. It's not just a country music town. Not
No,
not at all.
not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. So the tour is ongoing right now. You're on tour right now. What's next for you? Are you headed back into the studio soon, working on more music?
I don't have time. This is a we're on tour. We're going to be on tour all of this year through next year. It's 18 months of touring this project, and so this year we're going to be all over the United States, and then early next year we'll probably be going to Europe, and then at a certain point, possibly towards the end of next year, we may revisit some of the Croce shows,
Mm-hmm.
but for now, this album is my priority,
Yeah. Do you find yourself writing on the road ever, or you just stay focused on you
every day.
every day?
Yeah, yeah, it's an exercise. If you don't do it, it's you lose it. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain things that are innate. There are certain things that I've done for so many years that it's natural, but I practice every day. Every day I get to the theater, there's the piano. I sit down at the piano, I practice. I want to get to know the instrument that I'm going to be playing that night and knowing
Sure.
its idiosyncrasies. Same thing with songwriting. It's important. It doesn't need to write a whole song, and no one needs to hear it. There's nothing precious about it to me. It's work, and it's the best kind of work.
Yeah. When we talked about your fans, you've got new fans in the Croce's tour. This album is bringing new people to the seats. What would you like to say to them who have followed you around for 30 years?
Oh, I just want to thank him for coming to the show. I mean, I think that's the real thing. I think that I'm grateful I get to do this for a living. I'm grateful I get to share my abilities and the things that I've worked so hard to be great at with an audience. And I feel a certain gratification by being able to do that. I mean, having having a show like this, it's right now, it is definitely, the early stages of this is the first, we're only the fourth show or fifth show
Right.
of this tour, tonight. So it is it's still like little pieces of it are gelling, new ideas are coming in all the time. What if I try this or I try that? Playing some of my dad's stuff is so different now than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's um, performing these songs, the songs that I will perform in a given evening. It's joyful, and I think I don't want anyone to be confused. This is not a Jim Croce concert by
Yeah,
no
exactly.
means, but we will pay tribute. This is not one one legacy, but two. It's a family legacy of music.
Yeah, I think I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you and go through this walk through history, musical history. I feel like I sat through a class that I absolutely wanted to sit through. It was wonderful to speak to you about this because you have a font of information and a wealth of music knowledge and history and experiences and fans. When you go check AJ out, you're going to hear that in his music. You're not gonna get what you think. I think you're gonna get when you go see his show. He really brings it on stage, and his music just really highlights what an artist he has become over these 30 years. So I thank you so much for talking with me today,
Hey,
teaching me a few things.
well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.